I remember the cold snap that morning, the kind that bites through old bones and old memories. I was halfway to work when my backpack felt heavier than usual. Strange. I never carry more than my lunch and a few papers. When I unzipped it, I froze. A small bag of white powder, tucked neatly between my documents. My hands started to shake. I knew what it looked like, and I knew who'd put it there. My son, my own blood, had been acting strange lately, whispering on the phone, dodging eye contact. He thought I was blind, old, slow. But I've seen more in 60 years than he could imagine. I zipped that bag right back up. My mind went quiet, calm in the way only betrayal can make you. He wanted to ruin me, but he didn't know who he was playing with. I decided right then. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Before everything went wrong, my life was simple. Painfully simple, maybe, but it was mine. I used to wake up before dawn, brew my bitter coffee, and head to the garage where I worked as a mechanic. The smell of oil, rust, and dust became part of me. It clung to my hands, my clothes, my soul. My back ached most mornings, and my fingers were scarred from years of tightening bolts and fixing engines. But I never complained. Work was my rhythm, my escape, my promise to keep going. After my wife Claire passed away, the house turned cold, not from weather, but from emptiness. Her laughter used to dance through the halls when she'd sing along to old songs while cooking. Now, only the fridge hummed and the clock ticked too loudly in the quiet. I kept her picture on the kitchen table, next to her favorite mug. Chipped, but sacred. Every morning I'd look at it and whisper, "Don't worry, love, I'll take care of him." And I did. My son Daniel became my entire world, my reason to breathe. He was the light that pushed the darkness back. When he smiled, it felt like the sun itself came home. I made his breakfast every morning, eggs, toast, sometimes pancakes when I could afford flour. He'd grin and say, "You're the best, Dad," before running off to school with his messy hair and crooked tie. Those little moments, they were everything to me. I skipped meals so he could have seconds. Worked overtime so he could wear new shoes when school started. Sometimes I'd lie to my boss, saying I didn't mind staying late. Truth was, I needed every dollar. While other fathers slept, I fixed engines under flickering bulbs just to pay his tuition. My hands bled, my eyes burned, but I smiled through it. Every paycheck went to him. School, books, a better future. I didn't care about myself. My clothes got older, my back got weaker, but he had everything. When he got his first A+ in science, he came running home, holding that paper high. "I'll make you proud one day, Dad," he shouted. And I laughed, tears in my eyes. "You already have, son. You already have." We didn't have much, just each other. But on weekends, we'd sit on the porch, sharing peanuts and cheap soda as the sun went down. Sometimes he'd rest his head on my shoulder, and I'd whisper, "As long as you're happy, that's enough for me." He'd nod, half asleep, the evening breeze brushing his hair. Those were the moments I lived for. I never remarried, never even tried. How could I? No one could replace his mother. Besides, my heart didn't have space for anyone else. Every piece of it belonged to him. Every decision, every sacrifice, every dream I let go of was for Daniel. While others my age planned vacations or saved for retirement, I saved for his future. I imagined him as a grown man, successful, kind, maybe even a father himself one day. That vision kept me going when my body wanted to give up. Even when loneliness clawed at me late at night, I found comfort in knowing he was safe in the next room. I'd sit by the window, looking out at the streetlights, and whisper to Claire, "He's doing fine, love. He's becoming the man we dreamed of." And sometimes I could almost hear her soft laugh in the wind, telling me I'd done well. If someone had told me back then that he would be the one to break me, I would have laughed. Because I believed love, especially a father's love, could never turn into betrayal. I believed no matter what, blood would protect blood. But I learned the hard way that love isn't always enough. Sometimes, The same hands you raise with love are the ones that push you to the ground. And that realization, that cut deeper than any wound I'd ever known. I was wrong. Dead wrong. I found it by accident. The zipper caught on something hard when I reached for my wallet, and the little bag slid into view like a thing that knew it didn't belong. At first, my brain refused to make sense of it. White powder, tucked between my tax papers and an old receipt. My hands went cold. For a moment I just stared, like someone watching a slow train wreck and unable to move. My first thought was disbelief. Not Daniel, not my boy. He wouldn't do this. But memory is a patient thing. Images I'd pushed down floated up. Late nights, hushed phone calls, new clothes he couldn't afford. I opened the bag with fingers that trembled, and the world narrowed to that tiny thing between my thumb and forefinger. I remember the taste of bile rising in my throat. I sat down on the kitchen chair and tried to breathe through it. Maybe it fell out of someone's pocket, I told myself. That was the desperation of a father clinging to a better truth. I drove home without stopping at the shop. Each red light felt like the clap of a judge's gavel. He was on the couch when I walked in, hair tossed, phone in his hand. A laugh that used to warm me now sounded like a knife. "Dan," I said, keeping my voice steady because men like me learn to hide the tremor. "What's this?" He glanced up, eyebrow raised. "What's what, Dad?" I put the bag on the table between us. He looked at it, then at me, and for the first time, he didn't look like my son. "Don't play dumb," I said. "This was in my backpack this morning." He shrugged, the motion so casual it made me sick. "Maybe you put it there. Old age does weird things, huh?" My mouth went dry. "Don't you dare," I began, but he cut me off. "You always were forgetful. Maybe that's why you keep losing money, Pops. People notice." He said it like a verdict, not a son asking for forgiveness. The room tightened. I felt every breath like a betrayal. I asked where he'd been last night. He named a bar. He named friends. He lied with ease. When I asked about the watch missing from my drawer, the one Claire had left him in her will, he laughed. "Maybe you misplaced it, old man." A neighbor came by that afternoon, voice low and cheer. "P. I heard the police were looking for someone who's been selling," she said, eyes flicking to Daniel. She thought I was the scandal. She'd seen him drive off in a new car last week and assumed the worst, never imagining I'd put every cent I had into that rusted job he now called his step-up. I went through my things and found other small betrayals. Cash gone, my toolbox lighter, the photo of Claire shoved behind a book. Each theft was a paper cut. I confronted him again in the garage, where we'd once fixed things together. "Why would you do this?" I asked, voice cracking. He looked at me like I was a stranger blocking his path. "You never gave me what I wanted, old man. I had to get it myself." The cruelty of that sentence landed harder than any fist. It wasn't just money he'd taken. It was years of devotion, turned into fuel for his own selfishness. When I threatened to call the police, he smiled in a way that made my stomach drop. "Who's going to believe you? You're unstable. You're old. You forget things." His words were knives wrapped in a joke. He'd rehearsed them. He knew the places to jab. I felt my world unspool. Shock first, a stunned quiet, like someone had pulled the rug from under my life. Then sadness poured in, slow and heavy, like rain seeping through a roof. I thought of Claire's laugh, of pancakes we'd eat on Sundays, and felt the sting of humiliation. How do you stand when the person you raised calls you crazy, and the neighbors nod as if they've always suspected? Disbelief followed. The stubborn part of me that kept saying this must be a mistake, that maybe there's a reasonable explanation. But each lie he told cut that hope away. "I didn't put it there, Dad. You're imagining things. You always were dramatic." I could feel the heat of anger building, a furnace igniting behind my ribs. It started small. Sharp words, a slammed drawer, then grew into something that made my hands shake not with fear, but with the urge to fight. Anger turned to a cold clarity. This wasn't just a stupid prank or a kid's mistake. It was calculated. He'd planted doubts about my mind, my dignity, my worth. The worst moment was when he called me old in front of his friends, and they laughed, comfortable, like vultures around a bone. That laughter was a sound I will never forget. Small, cruel, the sort that erases a lifetime of care in one breath. I remember sitting on the porch that night, pressing my palms to my face until stars swam behind my eyelids. I felt abandoned in a way I'd never imagined, not just by my son, but by the life I'd thought was solid. My emotions moved in waves. Shock, then a hollow sadness, disbelief banging at the door, and finally, a hot, slow anger that settled into my bones. I walked past Claire's photograph, and the words I'd whispered to her months ago, "He's a good boy," echoed hollow. I'd been blind, and that blindness cost me everything. They'd taken my savings, my respect, my name in the neighborhood, and wrapped them in a neat little bag to throw into my life like garbage. When I finally looked at Daniel, really looked, I saw a stranger shaped like my son, greedy, disrespectful, willing to humiliate the man who'd given him everything. The betrayal didn't shout, it crept. It was in the missing money, the casual lies, the way he used my past kindness like a stepping stone to climb over me. And as the night closed in, the anger cooled into a hard, clear decision forming in my chest. I would not be walked over. I would not be buried by his lies. But in that bitter moment, before resolve hardened into plan, all I had was the raw ache of being betrayed by the one person I'd trusted with my whole life. I remember the night like it was a physical thing I could touch, the porch light buzzing, the air sticky with the last of summer. I sat there on the old wooden step until my bones hurt, the same step where Daniel once learned to tie his shoes. At first, the grief wrapped around me like a blanket I could not shake. It felt easier to fold into that sorrow than to face what had happened. I kept replaying the small things, his laugh, the way he fell asleep on my shoulder, the way he'd run to show me a scrapped knee and expect me to fix it. Each memory was a blade and a balm at the same time. Comforting, then cutting when I remembered what he'd done. The house was a museum of the past and a courtroom of the present. Claire's photo watched me like a silent judge. I tried to sleep, but the images kept coming. That tiny bag, his mocking smile, the neighbors' whispered looks. My stomach churned. My hands shook. I caught myself thinking, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's been a mistake. That voice, the one that hoped for innocence, was tired and small, but it spoke anyway. Then another thought crept in. How many times had I ignored the signs? How many nights did I tell myself he was just finding his way? There's a particular kind of pain when you realize your kindness has been used as currency. I thought about all the fines I'd paid, the extra shifts I'd picked up, the meals I'd skipped so he could eat. It flashed in my mind like a ledger of sacrifices, and the balance sheet read, "Debt owed, betrayal given." Anger started as a spark. It was almost sweet at first, a flush of heat that felt like justice wanted. But grief is a patient teacher. It sat with me and turned that spark into a slow burn, then into a steady flame. I found myself counting the little injustices, each one a stone in the path that led me here. The missing watch, the cash gone from my wallet, the way he'd called me old, as if that was an insult, not a truth. I thought about the nights I lay awake wondering if I'd done something wrong as a father. Now the truth was written clear as day. Had done everything right, and he had chosen to betray me. Shame visited me too, not because of what I'd done, but because I'd let him get away with it for so long. There's a pride that dies when you are pitied by the people around you. I felt that pride suffocating. I remember standing and moving through the house as if in a dream, opening drawers, touching the places where memories lived. My fingers stopped at the old toolbox. Every dent in it had a story, every stain had a name. And I realized I had been fixing things my whole life, cars, appliances, hearts, but no one had fixed mine. That realization hardened into resolve, Not the hot, blinding rage of a momentary fury, but a cold, patient clarity. I would not let him make a mockery of my life and walk away clean, not while I still had breath. My mind, which had felt like mush from despair, became sharp, cunning almost, like an old engine waking up. I began to plan in small ways, at first simply to protect myself, lock the doors, hide the important papers, note where money disappeared. But planning turned into strategy, and strategy into purpose. The grief receded enough to give space to thinking. I pictured him in cuffs. I pictured his friends turning their backs. I pictured the neighbors whispering, but this time, not about my weakness, about his crimes. I thought about Claire's laugh and whether she would have forgiven me for taking revenge. I didn't know the answer, and that uncertainty steadied me. There was a moment when I picked up his childhood toy from the attic, a small wooden car Claire had painted. It felt absurd to hold it and feel fury at the same time. That contradiction is what made me human, love and wrath braided together. I promised myself I would not stoop to blindness or chaos. I would be surgical, precise, and utterly fair in my way. No shouting matches, no public spectacle. I would make truth unavoidable. Enough of being trampled, enough of being dismissed as old and forgetful. As the night deepened, the house seemed to lean in, listening to the sound of my breathing growing steady. I whispered aloud, first to the empty room, then to Claire's photograph, then to my own heart. Enough is enough. And in that quiet, I made a vow, cold and sure, that I would not only clear my name, but make him understand the weight of what he'd done. I would return what he had given me, humiliation, lies, theft, and fold it back onto him with interest. I would be the instrument of his truth. He would see me not as weak and old, but as the man who could not be broken by betrayal. I would make sure his surprises were never kind again. I swore it then, with every scar on my hands and every gray hair on my head. I would have my justice. I moved like a man who had learned the value of patience, slow, steady, careful. First, I did the small, obvious things that would make the rest of my plan work. Locks changed, important papers hidden, a few small savings tucked away where he would never think to look. I told no one the whole truth. Secrets travel fast in a small neighborhood, so I fed people half-truths and harmless lies that would camouflage my real moves. At the shop, I started cleaning up more than usual. Not just engines, but my workspace, the corners of my life where things could be watched. I bought a cheap security camera online with cash and hid it in an old lamp that sat on the porch. I tested angles for 3 nights until the viewpoint caught both my driveway and the side of his car. Then I watched him. Not in a way that screamed suspicion, but in a way that any father would notice, where he parked, who came to see him, which faces lingered too long. I kept a journal. Old men collect things in odd ways, receipts, dates, names. I wrote down every odd phone call, every new jacket, every explanation that sounded like a rehearsed lie. I called in favors from the people I'd helped over the years. The retired cop who asked Ed to drop by for coffee owed me a favor after I fixed his lawnmower for free. He agreed to listen, to observe, to tell me what to look for. A former customer who ran a small courier service became useful, not because he wanted anything back, but because he respected the work I'd done for his sick father. He would keep an eye on routes and flags for me. I learned Daniel's patterns, the late-night meetups behind the warehouse, the way he always checked his rear view before stepping out. I mapped his week like a careful mechanic mapping an engine. Every movement mattered. I gathered mundane tools and turned them into instruments of clarity, magnifying glasses, glove boxes, a cheap UV light to check fingerprints on surfaces I had access to. But the heart of the plan was deception, not of the law, but of appearances. I would appear weak and confused when it suited me, then strike with evidence he could not deny. I started small theatrics, pretending to forget appointments, leaving the back door slightly ajar, speaking aloud about losing money. People overheard, and the rumors thickened. He began to feel safe in his assumptions. At the same time, I planted seeds among his friends. Not threats, just questions dropped at the right time. A suggestion here, an offhand remark there, like loosening a bolt until the part could be removed easily. There was an emotional part of the plan, too. I practiced my face in the mirror until my grief looked convincing and my confusion authentic. That face would be my mask when the others came calling. I acquired proof slowly. A receipt here, an odd text screenshot there, never more than a hint. I wanted enough to point a finger, not to shout in a courtroom. The shock would come later, precise and unavoidable. One night, I found something small in the trash intentionally, a crumpled note that mentioned a meeting time. I pretended ignorance while I recorded it carefully. It was ammunition. I used my knowledge of cars to my advantage. Where someone else saw a trunk, I saw posts, mental hiding places, places that collected prints and dust in ways a careless man would never clean. I learned to read faces again. The twitch of a guilty smile. The hesitation before a laugh. Those little tells made my timing perfect. I traded favors for loyalty. The bar owner who'd once refused him service in exchange for a free engine tune-up agreed to tell me when Daniel arrived late at night. Small debts, paid in secrets. I set up puzzles for him without him knowing. A phone call I let ring twice, a package I never mentioned, an appointment I forgot. Each one nudged him into predictable reactions I could later point to. When I finally had enough to make a case in my head if nowhere else, I prepared the most delicate part, the swap. I practiced the maneuver of moving things without leaving a trace. Years of greasy hands taught me how to avoid fingerprint smudges and how to place an item so it looked natural. I rehearsed stories for witnesses, a neighbor who, suddenly, remembered seeing the trunk open, a co-worker who could vouch that my son had been somewhere else when I claimed. None were lies. They were memories nudged into clarity. I also left contingency plans. If one thread broke, another would hold. If a person denied seeing something, a written receipt or a time-stamped camera clip would speak. I kept my circle small, 3 people at most, each with a different role, watchman, witness, and phone contact who could anonymously tip an employer. They weren't accomplices in a crime. They were my instruments for exposing the truth. Every night I tightened the timeline in my head. When to act, when to stay silent, when to let the police do their work, and when to refuse their involvement. I did not want to behave like a man consumed. I wanted a man resolved. Patience was my ally. I watched Daniel get bolder, thinking time was his friend. That arrogance made him sloppy. He started leaving traces where he once covered his tracks. The more I waited, the more he revealed. Texts he shouldn't have, visitors at odd hours, the smell of smoke in his jacket that didn't belong to anything on my porch. There were nights I almost moved faster when the anger flared like always. Each time I breathed through it and remembered the endgame, a clean, undeniable revelation that would strip him of his illusions. I made sure the evidence was not just my word. I wanted other people to see what I had seen in private. I wanted the truth to be self-evident. And when the moment arrived, when the threads were woven tight enough, I would pull them all at once. No melodrama, just the sudden dawning that this man they trusted was not who they thought. For weeks, I became a shadow in my own life, listening more than speaking, arranging more than acting, letting the plan live and breathe until it could stand on its own. People asked me if I'd forgiven him. I would only smile and say, "I'm tired." They thought it was resignation. It was something else entirely. Even now when I say the steps aloud in my head, there's a quiet amusement, how easy it is to be underestimated when you've been small too long. What I will do next, exactly when I will act, and how the final piece will fall. Those are details I still keep to myself. Let them wonder. Let him think he understands. The beauty of patience is that expectation becomes your weapon. When the hour comes, everything I've set in motion will snap into place. And in that silence before the reveal, I will watch him understand, slowly, finally, what it means to be betrayed. I watched it happen the way a man watches winter arrive, inevitable and silent. First, I let him feel safe. I kept my face soft, my steps slow, my voice tired when neighbors asked. He strutted, thinking I was a broken old man, and that arrogance became the first crack in his armor. On a Tuesday, I called his boss, not to accuse, but to ask a favor in a small, harmless voice. "Can you keep an eye on Daniel's car? I'm worried he's driving recklessly," I said. The boss, who'd once admired my work ethic, promised to look out for him. That night I placed the bag, the same white packet he'd hid, into a place I'd learned to find years ago, the hollow under his spare tire. I did it with a hand that remembers how to make things disappear and reappear without leaving evidence. Then I left a trail of little things, a receipt in plain sight, a thrown-away cigarette with his initials on the filter, a text screenshot I'd found in the trash. They were breadcrumbs meant for curious eyes, not proof, yet. Next morning, the retired cop I'd called stopped by the garage under the pretense of returning a wrench. He walked right behind me to the driveway, pretended to sweep his foot by the trunk, and asked innocent questions like a man who doesn't want to upset the rhythm of things. When Daniel left that afternoon, the courier, my other quiet ally, noticed him load a small, discreet package into the trunk and made a note of the courier number. I waited until the pattern was perfect, the boss's suspicion, the courier's note, the cop's casual observation. Then I tipped the company that handled employee security, anonymously and with a calm message. "I think a company car is being used for something illegal." I watched from the corner of my kitchen window as a security vehicle followed Daniel's route that night, lights low, official-like. When police came the next day, it was not my voice that named him. It was the system I'd nudged awake, evidence assembled by other hands. They opened his trunk in front of neighbors who'd once whispered about my forgetfulness, and that hush tasted like the first cold sip of justice. He cried out my name, his voice cracked like an old rope. "Dad, you see." "Let me up!" I kept my face still, felt the old tool marks on my palms like medals, and let the law do the rest. But the first twist came after he was taken. His so-called friends started turning on one another to save themselves. One of them, a skinny kid who'd always looked nervous around me, walked into a precinct and told everything he knew. Locations, times, names. Another, who had been the loudest in the bar, gave a taped statement about a meeting where Daniel had described framing an unstable relative. Each confession was a small mirror showing a different angle of the same truth. I hadn't expected them to break so fast, but cruelty corrodes loyalty. It always has. Then, and this was the beautiful bitter twist, Daniel tried to plead with his partners, begging them to lie for him. They laughed and handed over his messages instead, the ones where he bragged about hiding things in my old backpack like it was a joke. I watched the transfer of those messages in the evidence room on the day they were logged, his pride laid bare in text. His boss had already suspended him. The company posted a notice about an internal investigation, and the clients he'd hoped to impress pulled contracts overnight. Financial ties he'd spun as success unraveled. Banks' frozen accounts. Calls from collection agencies he'd ignored turned into letters he couldn't ignore. His new car, the one I'd sold half my tools to help him buy, was impounded when liens were discovered. People who once envied him now crossed the street to avoid him. The neighborhood that had whispered about my age now whispered about his greed. But I wanted more than social ruin. I wanted the full truth on the table where everyone could read it. So I walked into a meeting at the company with copies of the receipts, timestamps from my hidden camera, and a neighbor who'd seen Daniel loading the trunk late at night. My voice was steady as I read the timeline aloud. The room went quieter with each line. There was no shouting, and, oh, melodrama. Just the slow, irrevocable unspooling of a man's lies into facts. The final twist was the one he never saw coming. The insurance investigator called to reopen a claim after seeing the evidence. Daniel had been pocketing payouts and staging minor accidents to launder money through a fake repair shop. Court papers followed. The judge did not look at me like I was a fool. He looked at Daniel like any son who traded his father for quick gains. He was ordered to pay restitution, lost job prospects, and faced a criminal record that would shadow him for years. His friends were sentenced for conspiracy. Some got shorter terms because they cooperated. The skinny kid? He walked free, his conscience heavier, but his future intact. When the last gavel fell, there was no cheering, only the careful folding of life into a quieter rhythm. I felt a strange calm, like the moment after a storm, when the air tastes clean, and everyone counts what they have left. I didn't dance on his ruin. I sat on the porch and thought of Claire, of the pancakes and the porch light. Revenge tasted nothing like victory had in my boyhood fantasies. It tasted like a ledger balanced, theft paid back, lies exposed, dignity returned. In the end, the greatest surprise I gave him was not the arrest or the loss, but the slow, patient truth that stripped him of every mask he'd worn. He learned what it meant to be seen, finally, and everything he'd hoped to hide was laid out for the world to judge. And as I locked my tools away that night, I felt a quiet justice settle in the garage, where all the pieces had begun, and now finally fit together. After everything ended, the court dates, the endless whispers, the neighbors pretending not to stare, the house felt quieter than ever. But it wasn't the same kind of quiet I'd known before. This silence had weight, yes, but it also had truth in it, a kind that doesn't hurt to breathe. The air no longer carried lies, just dust, oil, and the faint hum of the old fridge that had witnessed everything. For days I walked around aimlessly. I'd pick up a wrench, then set it down again. The garage used to be our world, a place where laughter echoed between engines. Now, only the memories worked there, not the machines. I'd catch myself glancing toward the road, expecting to see Daniel's car pull up, headlights flickering like they used to when he came home late. But it never came. And for the first time, I didn't wait for it. Neighbors came by at first, with sympathy, with curiosity, with judgment disguised as concern. "Are you doing all right, Mr. Lawson?" they'd ask, pretending not to look toward the empty driveway. I'd smile the kind of smile that says, "I've been through worse," because I had. What they didn't understand was that this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about release. For years, I'd carried guilt for not being enough, not rich enough, not smart enough, not strong enough to raise him into the man I hoped he'd be. But now I saw it clearer. I hadn't failed him. He'd failed the love I gave him. One evening, I found an old photo tucked behind the mirror. Daniel at 12, grinning with grease on his face, holding a wrench too big for his hands. That version of him still lived somewhere inside the man who betrayed me. I sat with that picture for a long time, the lamplight trembling on my palm, and I whispered, "I hope you learn, son, even if it's too late for me to see it." After that night, I began fixing small things again. A neighbor's mower, a boy's broken bike. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about mending something that stayed fixed. Each repair felt like a piece of me was being restored too, one bolt at a time. Sometimes I'd see Daniel's name in the paper, probation hearings, financial disputes, small updates no one else cared about. I'd fold the paper, set it aside, and move on. The fire that once burned in me had cooled into something steadier, wisdom maybe, or just acceptance. I still visit the cemetery on Sundays. I talk to Claire, tell her everything that happened, even the ugly parts. I tell her I'm sorry it came to this, that love turned into war, and our son became the enemy. And sometimes, I swear, I can almost hear her voice in the wind saying, You did what you had to do. Now my mornings are slower. My coffee still tastes bitter, but I drink it with peace instead of pain. The world hasn't changed, but I have. I know now that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about freeing yourself from the weight someone else left on your heart. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that silence speaks louder than revenge ever could. You don't always have to destroy someone to win. Sometimes you just have to step back and let the truth do its work. Because truth, no matter how long it hides, always finds a way to stand in the light. Daniel lost everything that year: money, friends, pride, but I gained something I hadn't felt in decades: peace. I didn't need applause or validation, just quiet mornings, steady hands, and the knowledge that justice, when earned patiently, doesn't need noise. And maybe that's the real lesson in it all, that love, when betrayed, can turn into fury. But when that fury cools, it can turn into something stronger: clarity. So, if you ever find yourself standing where I once stood, betrayed by the blood you die for, remember this: vengeance should never be your first answer, but when it must come, let it come clean, quiet, and honest, the way truth always does. Because revenge isn't about hurting them. It's about reminding them, and yourself, that you were never the fool they took you for.